And then I will go to the introductions, and I believe, Serena, you're going to be first, followed by Katie, and then we might just have a Q&A and discussion and so forth. Of course, everybody was given the opportunity as well to take those complex problem solving assessments, which I took, and it'll be great to have some discussion about that as well in your experience of taking that assessment. So starting with the introductions, so we have Serena Murphy, who will be speaking first, and Serena works for Aon Assessment Solutions as the Director of Professional Services. And Serena is a recognised psychologist with experience in selection and assessment, leadership development and psychometrics. She's passionate about assessing for potential at graduate and senior levels, developing and coaching leaders, and designing fair, inclusive assessment processes. She leads a team of expert consultants who deliver best-in-class assignment projects for Aon's clients. And then we'll have Katie Dunn, and Katie Dunn is the Early Careers Manager for Applegreen. Prior to this, Katie worked on the Early Careers team in Kerry Group, looking after their graduate programme. With a strong background in HR, advisory, recruitment, and employee lifecycle experience across different industries, Katie is passionate about attracting graduate talent and developing them into future industry leaders. So, Serena, it would be great if you would get started there. Thanks a million.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for the introduction. And yeah, we're really pleased to be here with you today. And thanks for giving us some of your lunchtime as well, as I know that's a well-coveted time. Before I get into the rest of the agenda and things like that, I just wanted to give a bit of insight into Aon Assessment Solutions and what we do. So I work within Aon Assessment Solutions, which is part of Aon's global human capital practice. Most people know Aon for insurance, so they're quite surprised when we say we have a human capital practice or an assessment business. But Aon have actually lots of businesses that I'm still finding out about to this day. Within Aon Assessment, we're pretty much made up of occupational psychologists. And our main, I guess, mission is to help our clients to make better people decisions. So we assess over 10 million people each year, and we design assessments that are grounded in science and have won numerous awards. As I say, most of our colleagues who work in assessment are occupational psychologists, which means we have a background in psychology and also understanding human behavior at work. So for today's agenda, we're obviously looking at gamified assessment and how you can use gamified assessment to support your graduate recruitment and selection processes. I'll start us off by giving a bit of an intro into assessment and how we define it and how gamification comes into play. I'll then hand over to Katie, who will go through the Applegreen assessment process and the Applegreen graduate programme. I'll then touch on some hints and tips for preparing for an assessment, and finally touch on DE&I and accommodations and how we promote DE&I as part of the assessment process. And finally, as Deirdre mentioned, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. Brilliant. So to get into it then, I thought I'd start off by asking everyone, and actually I should have said this at the beginning, but we'd love to have as much of a discussion as possible. So feel free to come off mute and ask questions as and whenever you want to. Does anyone want to have a go at defining what a psychometric assessment is before I reveal the answer? Any ideas of how you define an assessment?
I think of it as maybe a test or assessment designed by psychologists. Would that be?
Yeah.
Close?
Yeah, definitely. It's when you say psychometric, it's in the name. It's typically designed by psychologists or psychometricians. And aligned with that, it has a scientific background. Anything from anyone else?
It may be used to measure different behaviours.
Yeah.
Judy here in SCTU, Carlo.
Yeah, definitely. So exactly that. They're tools that are designed to accurately measure aspects of a person, such as their preferences, abilities, or knowledge. And when we say preferences, that typically manifests in behaviour, just like you said, Judy. And they're typically designed to measure something relevant to the world of work. There are two different types of assessments, and we categorize them into tests of maximum performance and tests of typical performance. So looking at tests of maximum performance, that basically looks like how well do I do something? They're usually timed and they have right or wrong answers. So when we talk about tests of maximum performance, we talk about things like ability tests. So if anyone had a chance to demo the test before the session today, that would class as an ability test. There's also skills tests, so like something that tested your typing speed, and there's also knowledge tests, so like the driving theory test. So any assessments that look at how well you know something or how well you can perform, I guess, under pressure, where there's right or wrong answers tends to be a test of maximum performance. There's also tests of typical performance, which is how do I do it? And these measure how a person behaves or how they approach work. These are usually untimed and don't have right or wrong answers. So there's different ways of behaving, which means different things, and both can have their pros and cons, which is why there's not necessarily a right or a wrong answer. So these are things like personality questionnaires, motivational questionnaires, and situational judgment questionnaires. So moving on, where do they fit in the selection process? There are assessments obviously used throughout the selection process, which I'm sure all of you guys are familiar with, but typically we place online assessments after the application form stage. And normally people will go on to do a video interview and then an assessment center, which we also help to design. But psychometrics, which are delivered online, are typically put straight after the application form. And that's because they're a really cost-effective way of getting data on people, and especially high volumes of people, to enable good selection decisions. And they're much more effective than using CV screening, for example, so they're more likely to predict performance. Why do we use them for recruitment and selection? Anyone have any thoughts on why we use assessments for recruitment and selection and the benefits of them?
It can be more objective.
Yep, sorry.
Yeah, to be more objective. That's the first one.
To try and set up a scale where you can measure people against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So to benchmark individuals.
Dawn here, to look at individual competencies across different mechanisms, like using different kind of tasks.
Yeah. Pulling out behaviors and competencies. Yeah,
maybe
very
used
good.
Again to predict how someone might perform in a role based on experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've covered most of them now. So yeah, like everyone said, the first thing is that they're objective and fair. So well-designed assessments, and I say well-designed because I've seen some that aren't so well-designed over the years, but well-designed ones are objective and they're fair. So they're designed with a lot of scientific rigor, and because of this, they provide objective insight into someone's characteristics, and they're superior than, I guess, relying on your gut feel or someone's CV. If you've got 100 people all with a first-class degree, it can be kind of difficult to make an objective decision about who to hire. So they give you an objective lens as to what someone's potential is. They're also valid and reliable. So as I mentioned before, they have to be well researched and validated to prove that they measure what they say they're measuring. They must demonstrate scientific rigor, meet certain scientific standards, and there's typically extensive psychological research that goes into them. They're easy to complete. So someone touched on this earlier, that you're able to assess large groups of people, and they can be completed online anywhere in the world from the comfort of your own home on any device. And the only thing you really need is an internet connection and a browser. So this makes it really easy for employers to assess large groups of people from different regions of the world in a short space of time. And that in turn boosts application volumes and promotes diversity as well. They're relevant to the role. Someone mentioned this as well. They allow us to measure attributes that are relevant to the job. And as such, they're a powerful tool for recruiters to identify who's best fit for a certain role. And finally, they're predictive of success. So they predict a lot of different workplace outcomes, such as job performance, engagement, turnover, sales, and all of this helps to deliver return on investment. So you're getting the best people into the job. So they're one of the best predictors of job performance and much more predictive than the time-intensive CV screening. Okay, so about gamification and where this fits in. So gamification, what is it? We define it as using game design elements in a non-gaming context. So examples of gamification would be where you go through an assessment and you have levels to progress through. You might be given points depending on how you perform. There might be animations, or you might receive badges, or kind of stars, or some kind of award to recognize as you go through the assessment. There are two different types of gamification. The first one is game-based assessment. So this is where you'll actually see an assessment that is a purpose-built game and assesses candidates by how they play the game and the decisions and the choices they make. So a game-based assessment typically looks and feels like a game more than an assessment. A gamified assessment, on the other hand, is more of a psychometric assessment that's been enhanced with some game style elements to make it more engaging. So really behind the scenes, it's still a psychometric assessment, but it just has some features that make it more engaging for candidates. And the ones we design at Aon tend to be gamified, although there's lots out there that our competitor design that are game-based. Which I'll show you as well what these look like in a minute. Any input from anyone on why else you think we might design gamified assessments? What would be the other benefits of gamifying an assessment?
More engaging for candidates?
Yeah, definitely more engaging.
More relevant, just building on that, more relevant to the specific generation we're dealing with? Yeah.
Definitely. So you see this being more requested in early career populations, for sure. Yeah, so aligned with what you guys said, it's there to increase engagement. By increasing engagement, we also reduce dropouts. So the dropout is the number of people who start the assessment and decide, oh, this is boring, I'm not going to finish this, or I'm finding this too hard. So that's another factor for including gamification. It also helps to differentiate employers in a crowded market. So if you're trying to compete for graduates, it can help your assessment process stand out and for it to be easier to complete. And therefore, candidates and graduates will look at you better. So it promotes a modern and attractive employer brand in line with, the candidates of today and what their expectations are. I'll show you now some differences between game-based assessment and gamified assessment. So on the left-hand side here, you can see a 100%, I guess, game-based assessment. It looks like a game, and it doesn't look like an assessment at all. So you have it, that would be kind of the highest, where it's really, really game-based. And on the right-hand side, at the very right, you'll see a gamified assessment, which is what we design at Aon, which is the one that you guys would have had the chance to demo as well. So there's kind of a range from game-based to gamified. And you'll see that, if you're advising students, they might see a range of these. Typically with game-based assessments, they look and feel more like a game, which we typically don't agree with, because candidates might not take it too seriously, or they might not feel how this is relevant to the role. So we tend to take a traditional assessment and gamify it as opposed to creating a game-based assessment. But there's obviously pros and cons to both approaches. Moving on then, so to Motion Challenge, this is one of our gamified assessments that you guys had a chance to demo. For anyone who got to demo it, how did you find taking the assessment, and what did you like or dislike? Does anyone want to come off mute and share how they thought the assessment went?
I thought it was tough, Serena. It reminded me of chess. That was the experience I had with it.
Yeah.
I did, chess in primary school, but it was never a strength. And I know people who are brilliant at it, and I thought they'll do great at this. And so I suppose what struck me was, first of all, is it used for screening? I'm presuming that it is, but also, is it? One concern I'd have about it, is how close is this to the kind of actual work you'll be doing on the job, in terms of like what they call, face validity. Is this really, in terms of screening me out? Will I was wondering about that. How students would feel afterwards about it,
Yeah, and that's a good point. So it's exactly the face validity, like looking back at what I was sharing here, if you have a totally game-based assessment, there's almost no face validity to the job at all. With this one, I'd say all ability tests pretty much feel hard because they're designed for the maximum performance side, right? So you're always going to, even if you've done really well, you probably always leave an ability test feeling like that was really hard because the levels just keep going up and it's trying to assess at what point do I start making errors, really. So yeah, the difficulty is noted. I think a huge part of it as well that's key is the communication. So I know with you guys, we kind of just sent the demo across, but one of the things that's really important is to emphasize, I guess, to candidates when they go in and take it, what it is measuring and why, and how that's relevant to the role, to improve that face validity, like you said.
Yeah, and I suppose I'm just wondering as well, with the assessment, it's so divorced from language and numbers, if you know what I mean, in terms of this particular one. So I'm curious to know if it's used, is there like a verbal one used with it and a numerical one used with it? You know, I was curious about that.
Yeah, we typically, so it very much depends on the role and the client and I guess what they're trying to measure and their challenge if they want numerous assessments. We always advise multiple assessments because the more you have, the more robust of a decision you can make about whether to screen someone in or not. So yes, we would typically use it alongside other assessments. Our most typical ones would be verbal, numerical, and then a gamified on top of that, and a personality test. But it would depend, I guess, on like the volumes that client is going through as well. Because if it's low volume, they might just want one test, for example. But that would absolutely be a factor we'd have to consider in picking the test that was most relevant. This one is very different to a lot of the other ones we have because it's about planning. It's like you have to try and think 3 steps ahead. So it'd be quite different. It's quite a different one.
It's very strategic. And I suppose I'm just curious, and I'll just ask a last question because I know other people might have questions to ask. Is performance on this kind of highly correlated with the performance on the verbal and numerical? Or are they all very separate and very
Yeah, they would be distinct constructs. So we do see some correlations between obviously our assessments. Part of that is to do with general mental ability. But a lot of it's to do with the constructs themselves. So you'd find numerical and verbal reasoning and logical reasoning all correlate quite highly with each other because they all have an element of reasoning attached to them, which means you've got to like problem solve and think something through. This one's a little bit of a different one because it's complex planning. So it's a bit, like you said, it's a bit more strategic, and it's a bit more visual as well. So it would tap into slightly different things, but we would probably see some correlation with those other assessments as well. So that's another thing we look into when we put an assessment suite together. You know, if you're having numerical, verbal, and logical, and we know they all correlate quite highly, maybe it's fine to just pick one of them. Great questions, by the way.
Anybody else have any questions?
And does anyone else want to share their opinions on taking the assessment? Did everyone find it hard?
Well, I think it's what we do too. Hi. So this is Aisling. We're on a shared computer here. I did like how it said that you'd gone from level 1 to level 2. That was positive.
Yeah.
It distracted me from the clock, which normally I'm always intimidated by the clock ticking down. So that was a good thing for me. At the end of this, would a candidate, would they get feedback or does that just go to the employer?
So we have actually automated feedback reports. So we can give them instant feedback. So the second they've completed the whole assessment, they can download a report with their results.
And do most employers ask for that to be turned on? You know, do most candidates get that feedback?
Yeah, I would say like 90% plus of the time, our clients will want us to enable that. And it's included actually, our standard reports are included. A lot of the times we might actually build custom ones so that the client can communicate the feedback in their own language. But pretty much most of the time, if not all the time, we have feedback enabled.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and nice to hear about the levels because that's exactly the type of thing that gamification sets out to do, which is, you know, putting those levels in there helps to make it more engaging, distracts you from necessarily the stressful part of the assessment.
Yeah, did that all right.
Good to hear. Okay, I'll move on then in the interest of time, but we do have more time for Q&A at the end as well. Just a note on the other assessments we have. So we do have many different gamified assessments. We've got 6 in total now, and that all measure different things. The second one there, the one with the dots, is probably the one that people dislike the most, because that assesses your working memory, like how much you can remember 1 minute to the next, and it's really tests your brain. The third one is a logical reasoning assessment that uses kind of buckets and colours. We've got a numeracy one. So a lot of different ones there, but just to show you some of the stats we see when we use this suite. So 90% of candidates agree that these tests reflect well on the company's brand. 86% agree they're being taken seriously and treated fairly. And I think the problem with purely game-based assessments is that people don't feel like they're being taken seriously when it's a pure game. So that's why we opt for this gamified approach. Holds attention, so 96% feel that they are motivated to do well and engaged. 94% completion rate, and 93% speak favourably about the assessment experience. And also obviously that these assessments predict performance. So with one client, we found that people who went through this were 2 times as likely to be above average in customer interaction ratings and 1.5 times higher in critical thinking performance. So they're valid and reliable, but also help with engagement. Any questions before I pass to Katie to go through the apple green side?
I got one.
Yeah, sure.
So of this suite of assessments, would you find employers going for them all, choosing 2? How does that work?
There's usually 1 or 2 gamified assessments, I would say. And again, going back to what I was saying earlier, it depends on volumes. The ones that are typically used for graduates, I would say, is the first one, the third one, or the 5th one, because they measure logical reasoning and planning. So those are typically used the most for graduate roles. The most ability tests, like for my clients who have really high volumes, they would use 3 ability tests. Typically, like I was saying earlier, like a numerical, a verbal, and then either a logical or a planning one. Where the volumes are lower, they might just use 1 ability test. And it's always good to have like a behavioral measure, so a personality assessment or a situational questionnaire. So typically they split it between those. I'd say anything above 4 assessments, it would kind of start to get a bit too long. So we try and keep the assessment process to being like an hour maximum. With most of our clients, it's probably more like half an hour.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you
Cool.
very much, Serena. Can I pop in, Deirdre?
Yeah.
Yeah, Orla here. Thank you so much, Serena. Really clear. And just wondering 2 things really. How do you know it is the person who they say they are?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we do have virtual proctoring solutions. Not all of our clients enable it, but we can basically verify who's taking the assessment through use of the webcam. So that's something that some of our clients use. Other than that, you kind of don't really know, but we've done studies on faking and cheating, and we found it's very low in Western contexts, at least. It's less than like 3%. We've also done studies with our clients where some of our clients do verification testing, where they test that assessment center again. And we found that like 95% plus of those who did cheat on the assessment ended up failing at the assessment center stage anyway. So that's why it's really important to have multiple stages, because you don't want your only decision to be based on that first online test stage. It's really used to just help you get a quick understanding of who's applied, what are their strengths, who should I screen in, who should I prioritize, and then you've got to do further testing and validation with the later stages.
Yeah, that's great.
One of the things we've started to develop now is a way of actually identifying cheaters within the test in terms of how they respond. So that's a new thing that should be coming out in the next year or so. So you'll actually have a score.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's screening out. Now, I really appreciate that 90% of employers give feedback, because that then helps with the learning And then
Yeah.
I think everything changes if there's feedback. But otherwise, my sense is it's students going in and it's this mass weeding out. And I suppose it's just a part of the territory. And other than giving feedback, there probably isn't a huge amount more that you can do other than giving people an insight that actually this is going to give you an insight into the work.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it's really tough for graduates these days. You know, they have to make so many applications, they've long processes to go through. The one thing where we see assessment helping is reducing the onus on the application form. So where we've worked with clients, we kind of say, actually get rid of like 90% of the questions in the form, make that really quick and easy to complete. Don't ask for them detailed CVs and cover letters, just get them to do the assessment. And that's often a lot quicker than someone going and preparing all this information. Because again, you're asked all these things later on in the interview anyway.
Yeah.
But
Excellent.
yeah, it is a
Like
tough,
everybody,
it's a tough
everybody on the
world.
call knows I've loads of questions, but the last one really is the most important one. And I love to hear that you are interested in the fair and inclusive. But really, from what you've shown us, can it truly be inclusive?
Yeah, it definitely is. I think it helps to combat bias, first of all. And with the assessments themselves, we have to do, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, so I might save that question for when we come to it. But we do a lot of research to make sure the assessment processes are fair to gender, ethnicity, and social mobility. And we do analysis with all of our clients to kind of make sure. I guess the main difference is if you were screening CVs, that's where bias creeps in. Whereas by using assessments, you don't have any insight into someone's background, you know, where they've come from, what school they went to, you know, if they're rich or poor. You don't have any insight into anything. You're just looking at what is their potential, what's their personality, and what's their ability like.
But somebody who wasn't somebody who couldn't see, or somebody neurodiverse with that moving, I assume there's something to do with, you can turn it to sound or something else. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll show you a bit about that actually later on.
Grant. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. Really helpful.
Can I just ask one other question? Does it come in different languages? So for some students where English isn't the first, is there option to select language?
Yeah, there is. So we've over like 50 languages available for most of our assessments.
And that's turned on by employers. That's not something they choose.
No, it's turned on by default. Yeah, that's an important piece. You want to assess their ability, not their language capability. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh.
Brilliant. Thanks, Serena. And Katie, do you want to come in here? And
yes.
So Katie kindly agreed to come in and talk about her experience in terms of using the assessments as part of the recruitment and selection process in Apple Green. So
yeah, absolutely. And look, hoping I can give a little bit of colour to everything that Serena has talked about from the employer side, in particular some of the questions you had, Orla. I'll be able to answer some of that as we're going through. But look, it's really lovely to be here today and really just to share about Apple Green's graduate programme and our gamified assessment experience to date. So just to help set the scene, I want to give a bit of an overview of really who Apple Green are as a business, kind of challenge some of the perceptions that might be out there, the purpose of our graduate programs and how they are structured, and then really to dive into like what is our recruitment process and where does the gamified psychometric testing fit within that. So just to kick off, who are Apple Green? So a lot of people, when we ask this, if I go out to universities, you'll get, oh, petrol filling station, side of the road, you know, small business. But I suppose we are an Irish founded business, just for those of you who might know, and we were established in Ballyfermot, Dublin in 1992. Our founders are still in the business today. They are our CEO within the business. We're like, the nature of the business is we are a leading convenience roadside retailer in the Republic of Ireland, the UK and the US. So we have large scale motorway service areas and travel plazas, and then the petrol filling stations that you would see kind of in your local villages and on the sides of smaller roads. Business has grown to over 3 billion in annual revenue. We operate over 600, service plazas and motorway petrol filling stations across the 3 markets, and we employ over 16,000 employees. So, across our sites, we partner with over 70 big name brands that we are the franchisee partners with. So I've included a small snippet of them just on the screen here. It's always a bit of a fun game to cross off which ones you've tried. I'm trying to complete them all, but just gives you an idea of, I suppose, the brands that we are affiliated with across the stores that we work with. And if you see in the likes of one of our service areas that we have a Burger King, the people working in that Burger King are our employees. They're not Burger King employees. So that's Applegreen just in a nutshell to give a bit more information. So why did we bring in a graduate program? So look, as a business, Applegreen, we operate in an industry that's undergoing really significant disruption through changing consumer habits, the rapid growth of electric vehicles. And fundamental to our continued success is embarking on a well-developed growth strategy, and that we're having that top talent leading out and executing those operational goals within the business. So the graduate program really is a key strategic and sustainability priority for us as a business. The objectives of the programs really are to equip the business with that new generation skill set from Gen Z coming in. It's to embed and develop our graduates professionally and personally to meet the leadership succession needs of the future of our business in the future expanding markets that we're in. And it's also to foster really a culture of continuous learning within the business to help us stay ahead of industry trends and advancements. For any of you who kind of are partnered with any employers in FMCG or in retail, it changes constantly. The pace is rapid. So it's really to help us to try and stay ahead of the curve there. So what are the programs? So we launched in 2020 with our first program coming in, and we have two streams. So one of them is a retail graduate program and the other is the accounting and finance program. Since launching, we have brought in 30 graduates into the business and from a wide range of different academic backgrounds. So what do the programs look like? So our retail graduate program is a 2-year cross-functional program where graduates will have the opportunity to rotate across some of our corporate functions like HR, marketing, trading, analytics, and more. Graduates will complete a site rotation during that time where they take on a trainee manager role, and that's really to understand the operational level of the business. And they then have an opportunity for an international placement in one of our other markets, whether that be the UK or the US. So as I mentioned earlier, we have 5 of our graduates over in the US at the moment in our corporate head office there, and they are who I went out to visit. The Accounting and Finance graduate program, it's a 3-year program where graduates have the opportunity to rotate between 6 functions over that 3-year. So functions can include anything from management accounting to commercial finance to audit. We are approved as an ACCA Platinum approved employer. So all graduates coming in will be fully supported to complete their ACCA qualification, and we give them tuition provision and study leave. And the tuition provision is with Accountancy School, who are the #1 in Ireland for the ACCA exams. So as you can see, we've placed a lot of investment in this particular cohort coming into the business. We actually only take 9 graduates each year in total across the 2 streams. So it is really, really critical during recruitment process stage that we are selecting the right people to come in. So I've listed what our application process is on the screen here. And again, a lot of this feeds into typically what Serena said would happen across other employers as well. Stage 1 will always be an application form that they need to complete online, and that is a number of kind of screening questions and questions around their motivations and why Applegreen. They'll include their CV at this point in time, and that's stage 1. Stage 2, once I go through kind of screening for eligibility, and that's just checking that, they have the right to work, there isn't kind of criminal convictions maybe included. Anyone that's deemed kind of suitable would be sent through to psychometric testing stage, and that's stage 2. So from there, they are sent some of the tests, which I will talk about in a couple of slides. And when they complete that, we then get a report back as the employer letting us know what their score was, what their recommendation is. And it also actually is really helpful that it gives probing interview questions for when we bring them to the 3rd stage, which is assessment centre. So assessment centre is in person, it's face to face. And on the day, the candidate will have 3 activities that they go through. So they have an individual presentation on a brief that they are given a week beforehand. They need to complete an interview, and our interviews take place with our senior directors and our managing director within the business. And again, that's just showing kind of the championing and also the importance of this talent pipeline coming into the business, that we're making the right decision. And then they do a group exercise with the fellow candidates who come in with them. So again, the process can take about 2.5 months to 3 months in some cases from when we open in September for applications, we close the end of October, and then all across November is when we do the stage 2 and stage 3. So the 2022 recruitment campaign was the first year that we partnered with Aon for the stage 2 psychometric testing. Prior to using Aon, we did use another psychometric testing provider. I won't name them, but what differed with that provider is that they purely measured the cognitive capability and not the leadership potential side. So I suppose the reason why I wanted to change and was interested in Aon and kind of approach them around their solution was that in my experience across the couple of companies that I've worked on grad programs was that the results from just the cognitive capability measuring were not always the most predictive nor reflective of performance and role for those graduates who came in. And it wasn't measuring things like leadership potential or how they behaved in a role once they came in. The tests only measured that cognitive capability and not like their work style preferences. And whilst we still wanted to measure that as part of the process, it was important that we included a work-related preference style test to help us measure really fit in role and fit within Applegreen. Another reason was that exactly what was alluded to earlier. We found some people could play the system for the previous provider. It's been around for a very, very long time. There are a lot of how-to/cheat guides that are available online. So it was good to be able to find a new test that looked different, felt different. There weren't those cheating guides that were online, just so that we as the employer could trust it that bit more. Lastly, the previous form of testing, it didn't appeal to Gen Z. It very much felt like a test. I myself have been given them for certain roles that I've gone into and I detested doing it. The format was a bit boring, it wasn't engaging, and we struggled to get the completion rates at that stage. You would see a decline in, we've sent 100 people through to testing stage and maybe only 50 of them complete the test. So I suppose that really brings me to talk about the new gamified solution that we partnered with Aon with. So look, again, reiterating some of what Serena said, but look, these gamified assessments, they took robust scientific psychometric tests and they just introduced some elements of gaming. So that is like the progressing through levels or the earning of a badge. And it creates a more engaging and a more contemporary looking online test. They are digital natives, right, Gen Z. They're going to be judging us as an employer on what their experience is during the recruitment process. So it's nice that we're able to include something that feels new and that feels like more technologically advanced for them coming in. They're more engaging and actually they allow for accommodation. So it is a fairer approach from a DE&I perspective, which is something I would really champion definitely in my role in the business. The cognitive capability tests that we use, so they're shown on screen here. So it is that motion challenge one, which is the forward planning test. And we had the switch challenge, which is the deductive reasoning, kind of your logical reasoning test. And then we had the numerical reasoning test, and we actually split them. So the test that we used for those who came in on the accounting and finance program was slightly different to the one that we used for those coming in on the retail program, because we'd probably expect kind of a different standard for those in accounting and finance coming in. What was new that we never had before and what was brilliant about Aon being able to offer the solution for us was the Adept 15. So this was the personality questionnaire, or like you could call it your work style preferences test that we introduced. So I partnered with Aon to map out like what were the top 10 leadership competencies that we look for in our graduate hires. And I'm going to show you what those competencies are in 1 second. They're listed on the next screen. But we as an employer get back a fit score. Okay, so the fit score is between 1 and 9, and 9 is somebody who is an excellent fit, right? They are somebody who their work style preferences match with what we look for in terms of a fit coming into the company. A 1 would be somebody that would not be a great fit and probably actually wouldn't enjoy working in Applegreen coming in. So if I just quickly go here, so these are the competencies that were assessed by our candidates, for our candidates in Adept 15. So it's attending to critical detail, that you can behave flexibly, build relationships, champion change and collaborate. You can demonstrate resilience and drive results, that you foster innovation and influence others, and that you can work dependably. So that sounds like a lot, but Aon were able to provide a solution that it didn't feel like a hugely lengthy test, but we could definitely trust that what was coming back was accurate. So we receive the report again that we use, and within the report, it has kind of those probing areas that we can probe as the assessor at interview stage, or the hiring manager can probe in on. So maybe some areas that they scored highly in, but areas they didn't score as highly in, and some questions we should probably ask them to find out a little bit more. So as mentioned, we use this testing for the first time this year, and we really found that at Assessment Centre Day, the candidates that we really liked face to face on the day who performed well, it correlated with those who performed well in the psychometric testing stage. Some challenges, like I'm going to be real from like an employer point of view. Some challenges were bringing the senior leadership team on the journey of gamified testing and kind of debunking the myth with them that it is just playing a game, right? So it's really getting their confidence and their trust that it is scientifically robust. And it took a few calls, and will probably continue to be a challenge until they're a bit more comfortable with it and it becomes that little bit more mainstream over the coming years. Just to note for everyone on the call here, when you're speaking to your students, the testing stage in Applegreen, it isn't the holy grail signifier of an offer. It is very much used as a reference point, and it doesn't dictate the entire decision-making process. It can help, I'll be honest, it can help with shortlisting at mass application stage, but it's really used as a complementary reference point at assessment centre stage when they come in. And the assessment centre gives the hiring manager the opportunity to see the candidate in person and in action through interview and presentation and group exercise. So like it is really, I've had candidates that maybe say coming back from, so there's percentiles, and I'm not going to go into that too much, right? But we would have a certain percentile in Applegreen. And for the first 3 tests, they mightn't have met our benchmark, or they might be just on the cusp of it, but they could have scored a 7, 8 or 9 in our fit test. And I take that into account, and we'll bring them forward to assessment centre stage, and then we'll see from there. So it's really just, I'm hoping that that's beneficial for you in your roles and provide some useful insights, and hopefully it's something that you'll be able to share with your students. And again, I'm open to any questions that you might have from an employer perspective that you might want to ask. That's me from Applegreen perspective.
That's great, Katie. Does anybody want to come in with a question?
I just have a really quick one, Katie. Thank you so much. That was brilliant and so interesting. And I've come across Applegreen. I look after the work placements in DCU, so we've had contact with you quite a bit. And I know this is about graduate recruitment, but do you use a similar thing looking at your interns? Do you use a scaled down version of that, or do you not at all?
No, at the moment we don't for our internship program coming in. Internship, we just do interview with them. Okay. It's just one stage for that.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. That's good. Thanks. Thank you.
No problem.
I was just wondering, Katie, like, do you have different benchmarks for different streams within the graduate program?
We don't actually have different benchmarks. No, the testing, as I said, differs that little bit for certain areas between accounting and finance and retail. But no, we would try to keep it that it's a unified standard that we're bringing in. And I like to reiterate why all the stages, because I know me on the outside would think like, why is there so many stages? But the learning and development side that I suppose I didn't share with you there, like we invest a significant amount in like diplomas, training, and everything. It's high impact learning that we're giving that specific cohort coming in. So again, it's that we really need to be confident we've made the right decision coming in.
And I'm just curious about with the ADEPT 15, which is obviously a personality questionnaire, is that used to screen? Obviously the other tests are, and is that also used as part of the screening?
Yes, so that happens at the stage 2 that I mentioned earlier. And from that, like say those 10 competencies that come back, I get a really detailed report as the employer, and I will get like where they like, okay, for attends to critical detail, they got a 4, for, collaborates well and might get an 8, and they can give you some probing questions included as part of that. So it's very thorough is what I would say.
And it's obviously self-reporting. It's not testing directly, it's self-reporting. And isn't it the ADEPT 15? And just in relation to that as well, with English being a second language, for example, can they take it in their own native language? That ADEPT 15?
Yeah.
Okay. That'd be very important to that one, wouldn't it?
Yes.
One thing to note, it's come up a little bit about faking, and with ADEPT it's self-report as well. So one of the questions you get is, oh, can people cheat on that? It's very hard to cheat on Adept, because you don't know what the employer is looking for, and we're not asking you to, like, we're not giving you all the competencies, and you can't actually figure out from which statement relates to which competency and how is that all going to play out. So it's very hard to fake it. I mean, even if I try to, get high scores across all of your competencies, knowing the test inside out, I don't think I'd be able to do it. But another important thing to note is all of our tests have really big item banks. So for most of the assessments, the likelihood of you getting the same test, exact same test twice, is like 0.000001 or something really small. And Adept actually adapts to how you respond as you go through the test to get more, make your result more accurate. So you tend to find people find it quite accurate because it does have that intelligence to adapt as you respond.
I think something for you to share with your students as well is, for something like Adept 15, don't lie, be honest, respond how you would, because you don't, like, somebody who you don't want to come into a company that doesn't match with you, right? Okay, so like somebody who scored a 1 on that probably wouldn't enjoy working in with us. So don't answer it how they think the employer would want them. Like, just answer it honestly to yourself.
Yeah, that's 100% the same advice I'd give.
And Katie, it was mentioned earlier, I think Serena said that maybe in time employers would feel that stage 1, the application form, might be less needed, the CV, the filling in the application form, cover letters, all of that. Do you still think there's a place for that information, or less so?
I think it's gonna, I'm gonna answer that really honestly. I think it's on the company that you're in. I'm standalone in my role, so I don't have a recruiter, I don't have an administrator. Okay, it's me. So all 400 to 700 to 1,000 applications come to me. I value them at the moment in my role because it helps to give a little bit more insight. I don't probably have some of the tools that would enable me to be able to screen out that stage at the moment. Do I think? I don't think for the foreseeable, no. I don't think for the next few years. That's not going to be included as part of it. And I want to see, like, we're going to want to see upfront kind of motivations and interest in Applegreen. That's always going to be a question I'll want to know off the bat, why they're looking to apply to us, so that we're not getting Susan, who's applied to 10 different companies, and it's a blanket application that's come in that's not tailored towards us. That is something as an employer I would look for, that it is tailored a little bit towards us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One of the places we see the motivation coming in a lot more is if clients introduce or companies introduce a video interview stage, one that's pre-recorded. So that can sometimes offset it a little bit. But people want to see that, you want to see the motivation in there somewhere for sure.
I'm just conscious of the time, the mention that was made earlier of the inclusivity and
yes.
Yeah, I was
Yeah, I'll share my screen again and I'll just bring up.
And Paul, I can see you got your hand up as well, so we'll make sure you get your question answered as well.
I had some guidance on hints and tips for preparing for an assessment, but I'm happy to share that after because we're a bit behind on time. But there's a really long guide I can share on that. So I'll just move to the DE&I for now. So just a couple of things I mentioned before, but the reason why assessments can help with drive D&Is, because they're objective, as we mentioned earlier, they can help reduce the influence of cognitive biases in decision making. A good example of that is where you use Adept to support with your interviewing by identifying which areas you need to probe deeper into. So if someone, just really likes someone in an interview and their Adept scores are saying, actually, this is an area of risk for this person, it can help to counteract cognitive biases and help people to think twice. They ensure everyone has a fair and equal chance to demonstrate their strengths, and they can enable social mobility as assessments can be accessed anywhere at any time and on mobile devices. But I've noticed here that they only work if they're designed to be accessible and fair. So going back to what someone was mentioning earlier, a really important part of assessment is making sure that the assessments are accessible. One of the things we do is we build in accessibility features into our platform. So the video will show you some of these features like keyboard navigation, high color contrast. So that does help people with visual impairments. Our assessments do work with screen readers as well. But we accept there's a lot more that needs to be done in this space as well. We're very much at kind of the start of our learning journey with this in terms of making assessments accessible. We now have working groups within the business where we look at things like neurodiversity, but also accessibility. And we have various experts that we've brought in, including partners to, I guess, develop our capabilities in that space. So the first thing is we obviously design our assessment so they're as inclusive as possible. We make them mobile first because we know that people from lower disadvantaged backgrounds are more likely to complete on mobiles. So that's really important for diversity. As I mentioned, we have loads of DE&I working groups that help us to get better in this area. And we do ongoing analysis. So with all of our clients, we tend to look at things like adverse impact. We adjust cutoffs regularly to make sure that, you know, we are getting the right diversity through the screening process. And we also have a robust accommodations process. So to show you what we mean by that, I'll just go to the next slide. So with the accommodations process, we have a basically 24/7 support team that candidates can reach out to request accommodations. So some of that might involve us pointing them to the accessibility features we have, but in all cases, they have a chance to speak to a qualified support person to understand their needs and how they feel they might be impacted by the assessment process. So we take a case-by-case basis. We don't believe, you know, one size fits all, and we tend to work with each candidate to understand what are their needs and how can we best adjust the assessment for them. In most cases, it is enough to give people extra time, and that's what they're happy with. But in other cases, you know, we might need to give a different type of adjustment. Where we feel we can't make the adjustment, what we will do is make a case to the employer that the candidate needs an exemption from the assessment, or they need to be pushed forward to the next stage. So one thing I definitely encourage you to say to your students is if they have a need or they feel they can't perform their best on an assessment for any given reason, that they definitely reach out to the test provider or the employer, because they should definitely be committed to giving them accommodations to make sure the assessment process is as fair as possible. And just to say, we've done some research on our accommodations process, and we've found that those who go through the process are just as likely to pass the assessments as those who don't. So it does show, we've got evidence to show that when people go through accommodations, they tend to, you know, work to put them on a level playing field.
Sorry, thanks for that. And I'm just conscious of the two different questions as well that come in. Paul, I think you were first. Do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yes, thank you very much. That was it was very interesting. Just very quickly, I may have missed it at the beginning, but could you just tell us about the GDPR issues and how they're handled? And also around the accommodation, is that, you say that you handle it on a case-by-case basis. Is that then between you, the test provider, or do you share that accommodation with the employer?
Yeah, so it depends. Yeah, no, it's good questions. So with GDPR, we're typically the processor of data. So the client always owns the data and we process the data on their behalf. So that's a GDPR, I guess, terminology. We obviously have data privacy statements that candidates have to, you know, agree to, and data is, you know, held in our system. So all of that is explained to them. If they want to request their results, you know, that's a right people have under GDPR, they can do so. And we have a dedicated team who respond to GDPR requests for information. So hopefully that covers your question on that one. The second piece around where the information goes, so it typically stays within our support team. And we feel quite strongly that if a candidate reaches out to us for adjustments, you know, they might not need that same adjustment for a later stage. It might just be specific to that, you know, the stage that we work with them on. So we typically don't pass that information on. It's kept confidential. Depending on the situation, there might be some situations where we have to involve the client, in which case we need to share the detail. But in most cases, it's between us and that candidate. So what we encourage them to do is after, you know, if they're next pushed through to a video interview or an assessment centre, that they should disclose their needs again. And although this might be annoying if someone has to keep disclosing their needs, we find that's better, because if we tell an employer, oh, they've contacted us for an adjustment, We don't want that to bias them in later stages. It's kind of up to the person to decide when and how they want to disclose what accommodations they want.
Okay, and my last question is just going back to the GDPR issue, and that is, you say that they can, the candidate obviously can seek the results. Do they know that? Do you tell them that at the outset, that they can seek this? Do you give them that piece of GDPR information?
I'm sure there will be something around it about it in the privacy agreement, because that will cover, I guess, their rights under GDPR. But we wouldn't typically, I guess, explicitly state it in like invitation emails or anything like that. But definitely it would be covered in the privacy statement that they opt into.
Thanks very much. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Just from to be quick, I know we've one question. From an employer point of view, like typically if there's I am emailing out to let somebody know they've been progressed to stage 2, within it I will say if you need any reasonable any accommodations in terms of the testing, to let me know also. So we do make sure that we catch that for them.
Yeah.
Thanks. There is just one more question from Brenda. Brenda, do you want to give your question there? It's written in the chat that Brenda would like a practical example of how a client has accommodated an exemption.
Yeah, I say the most typical one is dyslexia. So that's the one we get the most. I think it represents like 70% or like roughly of most of the requirements that come into us. And typically with that, students tend to know exactly what they need, which is normally around 25% plus extra time. And they'll have like reports from psychologists that they sometimes voluntarily send to us saying like, here's some more information about what I typically get. But we always reconfirm with them, is this enough time for you? So it's really up to them to drive it and to let us know what they need. And we feel very strongly that the candidate knows best what they need. And we're not here to catch anyone out. Like if they need 50% extra time and they have a reason for that, then that's something we will honor and give to them. I do know that other providers, they manage this differently. So it's not the same with everyone, but I'd encourage all students to always ask for accommodations and don't be afraid to reach out about that, because it's definitely something that should be taken seriously.
Okay, very good. I don't think there's any other questions unless anybody else wants to speak up, but I think we've actually gone over time. But it was so interesting and so informative, and there's all these lovely comments about people, people really enjoyed it. Anybody get any burning questions before we finish? Okay. So
Just,
that was wonderful. Sorry, Serena.
Just to say, Deirdre, yeah, I've got a couple of links to share about hints and tips to prepare for an online assessment. I didn't get to chat through that in detail, but to be honest, they're really self-explanatory, and we've got a website that you can actually go on that has all the information and questions on how to prepare, what questions you need to ask yourself, and guidance. So that's something you can actually give to your students as well. So I'll share those details with you guys.
That'll be excellent, and then we can circulate it to all of the staff member in the various associations, in the various member organisations. That's really, really useful and really interesting. So I really appreciate both of you taking the time to give us a really good insight into what's actually happening at each stage. It's very so transparent, and I really appreciate that. And if it's okay with everybody, we might let you go on with your busy days. And thanks again. We really appreciate this really great session. Thank you so much.
No worries at all. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks so much for having us.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.